welcome to this episode of the Center for Audit Quality's Profession in Focus. My name is Julie Bell Lindsay, and I am the Executive Director of the Center for Audit Quality. I am very pleased to welcome today the former chairman of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, Mr. Jay Clayton. Jay, thank you for being here.
Julie, it's nice to be with you.
Let's dive right in to the discussion, and let's talk about auditor independence. You know, the public company audit profession views auditor independence as foundational to audit quality. And last year, the SEC made some very limited, targeted amendments to its auditor independence rules that really had not been updated in 20 years. Can you tell us why this was a priority on your agenda and what impact you hope the revised independence rules will have?
Well, thank you. And I agree that independence is foundational, and it's something that should be thought about continuously in the auditor-issuer relationship. And I believe that audit committees are a tremendous focal point for that. So the independence rules were put in place 20 years ago or more, have developed, but our market has changed dramatically, including the number of interconnections across portfolios, whether it's private equity firms, larger asset managers, permanent capital vehicles, et cetera, and I would say the increased globalization of firms. All of that has led to touch points that were not considered fully or to the same extent when the rules were written. So if you ask me to sum up what we thought about, and I think what you need to continue to think about is how can we best preserve independence in that type of global environment, particularly when, and we'll say it, there are a limited number of firms that have global reach. So taking all the principles of independence, all the experience, what changes can you make to ensure that there's actually competition in the area for audit services that embeds that foundational independence and that the rules don't get in the way of those two things. Said simply, were there any situations where we would have found an independence violation as a result of those kind of tangential global connections that we shouldn't clean up from a modernization point of view? And that's the perspective that I personally brought to it. I think the staff did a wonderful job of looking back across the history of interpretations and providing greater clarity without in any way undermining auditor independence.
That's very helpful, and I think that's key because there seems to be a narrative that the changes really dismantled the auditor independence requirements, which is just not the case. As you noted, it's really reflecting the market developments over the past several years.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the questions to ask is there anything that the changes permit that would have been found to be a violation of auditor independence in the past? And again, I speak for myself, from my own perspective, no. And that was a question I continually asked as we went through this.
That's a great way to think about it and a great way to phrase it. Let's shift gears a bit and move on to COVID-19. For most of 2020, it's probably the understatement of the year, if not the decade, to say that everyone was adjusting to the challenges of COVID-19. Under your leadership, the SEC was very proactive early and often in issuing guidance to address market uncertainties, as well as stress the need for the continued orderly operation of the capital markets. From your perspective, how did you see companies and auditors adapting to ensure that investors continue to have access to high quality financial information in order to make investment decisions?
Well, as I look across the landscape of U.S. public companies, and we can pick a sector or specific companies, but as I look across the landscape, I think that the companies together with their auditors, and I'm sure with their audit committees. I can't emphasize enough what a great dynamic that is when you have unexpected situations, to bring your audit committee, an experienced group of people whose job it is to ensure that the financial statements and the financial presentation is something that is crafted in the best way possible for investors, come to the table. An excellent job. I look at the airline industry. Let's just look at the communication around cash burn, their ability to control costs, their forward-looking information around those types of elements. I'm not going to pick a particular one, but I watched the whole sector. They did an excellent job of communicating where they were financially. And I think investors had a fairly good understanding in most sectors and for most firms what adjustments they were making to deal with the effects of COVID. I think it's a real feather in the cap of our system that it worked like that people didn't have to guess how firms were dealing with it.
That's great to hear from your perspective on the reaction to the markets, to the SEC's guidance, and to the pandemic. One of the other challenges of COVID-19 that we certainly have at the Center for Audit Quality been focused on is really the heightened risk for fraud at public companies. Additional opportunities, whether it's being fully remote, additional pressures across the spectrum. What, from your perspective, what steps should be taken to continue to protect investors in this heightened fraud risk environment?
Well, that's a great question. Let me just follow up on one thing from your last question, which is the virtue of multiple companies being transparent like that. Let's put it, good behavior by several companies causes good behavior by their competitors and others. And you saw that virtuous dynamic in the way companies were disclosing where they are. Let's see that virtuous dynamic in companies disclosing what changes they're making to their internal control systems in light of our shift to remote working and the like. I really like seeing disclosure around, here are the adjustments we've made to our control environment that we think are necessary in light of the change in the work dynamic. And we're seeing that as well. That kind of rising tide lifting boats is important. I do believe, going back to the audit committee, audit committees would be wise to ask their auditors and management, how have controls changed? How's your testing changed? That type of thing, to ensure that new types of fraud, how do I say it, are well deterred.
Notwithstanding all of the very real challenges that we've talked about with COVID-19 and the pandemic, what is your view of audit quality today? And in particular, I'd be interested in your perspectives on the influence of Sarbanes-Oxley, which was adopted almost 20 years ago, on the role of audit quality here in the US.
So I think that there are a number of elements that have improved since Sarbanes-Oxley, and I'm a believer, as I've emphasized many times, in the independent audit committee as tremendous bang for the buck, as I like to say, in terms of reform. Terrific, and I think that, combined with certainly more advanced systems, the use of what I will say is better control systems incorporated throughout the financial reporting. The financial reporting today internally is far different. I believe that audit systems have adapted, and I tip my hat to the PCAOB as well. So I think that with the PCAOB, with independent audit committees, with what I would say is more robust reporting systems that then lead to more efficient auditing, we're in much better shape. Again, it's an evolution, and it's going to continue. I would like to see, I'll group them together, and it's probably unfair, the rest of the world catch up think it's important. And there are places where it's much more important. The independent audit committee that has responsibility for the financial statements, true responsibility, is extremely important.
And you probably would also, as part of the Sarbanes-Oxley reforms, having the certifications as well, from management with the audit committee. I think, like you had said before, the dynamic of those three different functions is very, very important. And as we have discussed, yes, we are starting to see other countries look to implementation of SOX-like reforms.
Yep. No, I would agree. I think those types of clear procedural lines and responsibilities have added a great deal.
Well, Jay, I have one more question for you, and that is, if you're willing to share your thoughts, what advice would you have for the next chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission?
Well, look, Gary has been nominated. I congratulate him. I've had the pleasure of working with him on transition. Extremely intelligent, capable, energetic person who knows markets, and I think that he's going to do things his way, assuming confirmation. But I would use that knowledge of markets, that knowledge of issuers, and that knowledge of investors as a whole. Again, thinking at the end of the day, which I know he does, about the interests of our long-term investors. So I wish him well.
Jay, thank you very much for these terrific insights. I would like to thank all of our viewers for joining us today for this edition of the Center for Audit Quality's Profession in Focus.